All right, in this part of the award show, we're going to knock out Most Valuable Player, Defensive Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, and I'm going to list my top 5 ballot for each award. The 3 big named awards, aside from Sixth Man of the Year and Coach of the Year, all the awards are big, but these are like the top ones, the ones that impact legacy probably, Defensive Player of the Year, MVP, and Rookie of the Year. Now, obviously, this is I recorded my first part with the intention that I was going to do the entire thing, but then I realized that the video was going to be too long, and I decided to just break it up into 2 parts. Now I'm recording the second part a few days after the NBA announced their finalists for each of the awards, and also a day after Marcus Smart was announced as Defensive Player of the Year. But I'm here to let you know I've had my personal award winners down the entire time. At the end of the season, I did a full over-season review. I was keeping track during the season, so I've been tracking my list. So my list have been before anything was released, just an FYI. And again, if you have an actual basketball disagreement with any of my picks, I would love to hear it in the comment section below. But if it's just the typical run-of-the-mill, you clearly don't watch the games, or you didn't pick my guy, so I'm mad at you and I'm just going to assume you know nothing about basketball, then I'm just going to ignore it. And we're just going to keep it moving. But without further ado, let's start off with Rookie of the Year first. Then we'll do Defensive Player of the Year, then MVP. So Rookie of the Year, number 1, I have Evan Mobley. Now I know the race got closer towards the end with Scotty Barnes, and a lot of people seem to be picking Scotty Barnes for Rookie of the Year, and that is also a perfectly fine and acceptable choice. He was a worthy candidate. To me, it was between Mobley and Barnes, and Cade Cunningham over his last 50 games was steadfastly just making this a 3-man race, and I really think it's these 3 guys that all have a legit case for Rookie of the Year. But to me, Evan Mobley is my pick for Rookie of the Year. He was one of the key cogs in the Cavaliers' resurgence this year. He was the guy that allowed the Cavaliers to play with 3 big lineups, because Mobley's ability to not only protect the rim, but also switch out and guard the perimeter like a 6'1" player was just uncanny. And his ability to recover all over the place. He had a legitimate case to make an all-defensive team this year. Had a fringe all-star case too, and not just saying that because everybody else was saying that. He had a fringe all-star case legitimately. And yes, I know the response is going to be, well, he had Darius Garland, he had Jarrett Allen. And yes, that is true. But also, let's not act like Mobley was a bystander in the Cavs' resurgence. Mobley averaged 15, 8, and 2.5 assists per game, and he showed some legitimate flashes as a guy who can be a main offensive hub for a few possessions. But he wasn't the main option, but he did have great pick-and-roll chemistry with Darius Garland, great high-low stuff and high-low chemistry with Jarrett Allen. And also, like I said, he was dominant defensively from day one. And it's funny because I've seen recently absurd takes about how winning shouldn't matter in Rookie of the Year. When is winning ever factored into the Rookie of the Year award? Usually the Rookie of the Year winner is on a bad team. But whenever there's an anomaly like this, where top rookies, top talented rookies that are key options on teams that are making the playoffs, winning has to matter. I'm sorry, it just does. And it's fucking ridiculous to me that we're all of a sudden poo-pooing winning basketball games whenever there's the off chance every 10 years or however many set of years it is, we get a rookie class that's this special. And Mobley and Barnes, for the most part, were that special. Yeah, you could say they didn't have the burden that Cade Cunningham had in terms of carrying inferior teammates or being on a team that's in the rebuilding stage. But it's one thing if it's like, okay, Cade Cunningham versus Bones Highland. Obviously, that's a dumb discussion. Cade Cunningham is way better than Bones Highland, and Bones Highland shouldn't sniff the Rookie of the Year. Maybe it's a terrible example, but Bones Highland was on a winning team, but he's clearly not better than any of the top 5 even rookies that I mentioned or that you see on the list right here. Evan Mobley and Scotty Barnes were that special and immediately showed they're going to be future superstars for their franchise, and they were key reasons why the Cavs and the Raptors had the resurgence that they did. And at one point early in the season, it looked like the Raptors were going to go straight for the lottery, and then they had a great turnaround, and Barnes started being entrusted with the offense more. I don't even know what Scotty Barnes is in a good way. He's a point guard one possession, a center the next possession. He's defending the 1, he's defending the 5. Even though he's not as good of a defender as Mobley, he is still really good on that end, and he's a special competitor. Those two were key cogs in the resurgence of their respective franchises. So I don't want to hear shit about, oh, winning shouldn't matter in Rookie of the Year. That's one of the dumbest fucking things I have ever heard. Excuse my French. I just can't believe that take is actually out there. And I get it. Pistons fans want to see their guy, Cade Cunningham, win Rookie of the Year. And Cade Cunningham is going to be a future, I think, multi-time MVP player. I think it's obvious. Whatever the it factor is, he has it. His pace is incredible. Honestly, the pre-draft comparisons of Luka Doncic don't sound so absurd when you realize that they kind of have similar games in terms of their pace and how they can't be sped up. Cade Cunningham is going to be a superstar in my opinion, but I also think Evan Mobley will. I also think Scotty Barnes will be a superstar, but let's not pretend that winning doesn't matter, especially when it's in an anomaly year such as this one where two great rookies are actually key factors in a bunch of wins that their respective teams otherwise weren't expected to do before the season started. The Defensive Player of the Year award race was kind of thrown out of whack because Draymond Green just missed a lot of games. Otherwise, he would have been the runaway Defensive Player of the Year. He's the best defensive player in the NBA this side of Giannis, and because he was injured, it was just thrown out of whack. But there is a lot of worthy candidates, so I'm going to list out mine. I know Marcus Smart won Defensive Player of the Year. He's a worthy Defensive Player of the Year award winner, so congrats to him. I did not have Marcus Smart as my Defensive Player of the Year, so I'm going to list out my ballot right now. I actually had Jaren Jackson Jr. as my number 1 pick for Defensive Player of the Year. And yes, I know he still has foul problems. That really hasn't changed since his rookie year. But he took a mega leap this year as one of the best defenders in the NBA when he's on the court. The Grizzlies defense tanks actually when he is not on the court. And if you're wondering what the defensive numbers look like with Jaren Jackson at center and not tethered next to Steven Adams, well, those numbers hold up too. The Memphis Grizzlies had a top 5 defense this year, and whenever Jackson was off the court, the Grizzlies' defensive rating was around a 112.3. That's per cleaning the glass, which would put them around 17th. So there is a stark difference between being around 17th versus top 5. Also, when Jackson is at center, the Memphis Grizzlies' defensive rating is actually better than their top 5 overall season defensive rating. So Jackson has just been impactful everywhere. I understand if voters did not want to choose Jackson because of the fouls and all that stuff. That's fair. But to me, Jackson was the most impactful player for a top 5 defense, led the league in blocks. He's just everywhere. His wingspan is everywhere. You can place him anywhere on the court, and he's just an impactful defensive player. Definitely needs to cut down on the fouls, but that didn't really sway me too much in penalizing him to not winning this award. Then number 2, I have Marcus Smart. I think he's been fantastic all year, has put together one of the best defensive seasons from a guard in recent memory. The Celtics defense is just absolutely dominant, switching everything, and Marcus is the head of the snake for that. And then number 3, a lot of the same reasons can apply to this player as well, Mikal Bridges of the Phoenix Suns. His ability to just have long stretches in a game to lock up the other team's best player or to just muck up any type of offensive scheme that his opponent cooks up. Mikal Bridges is just fantastic in that regard. I know some of the metrics don't love him too much, but if you're watching the game and if you look at other stats, he was just impactful all over the place. And you can't put a price on somebody that can lock up the opposing team's best perimeter player. And he was the best defender on a top 3 defense, the Phoenix Suns. And then filling out the rest of the list, Bam Adebayo also could have been a serious contender for this award, but he missed too many games as well. Not as much as Draymond, because Draymond is not on my list, unfortunately. He just missed way too many games, and even in a COVID season where games played shouldn't matter as much, he missed a lot of time, and when he came back, he was not the same for a few weeks. Then he started to round into form towards the end of the season, but Draymond is off my list, and then I have Rudy Gobert at 5. Now we get to what might be the most contentious race for this award in NBA history, maybe. Most valuable player. Now, let's just start off rip. To me, all season, the top 3 candidates in no particular order, and there is no one else in this tier. I don't think it's debatable. Shout out to Devin Booker. Shout out to Jason Tatum. Shout out to Luka Doncic. And other MVP candidates that had great seasons or came on after the new year, or in Devin Booker's case, was the best player on a 60-plus win team. But to me, the top 3 candidates all year in their own tier was Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. And if that wasn't your top 3, you just did it wrong. That's just my personal opinion. If you had somebody in your top 3, do you. But to me, there is no debate, and I think it's absurd to have anybody else in there personally. But let's get right to it, because really, and it's not a cop-out, and it's weird because a lot of people kind of agree on this, and it's weird that we can agree on anything unanimously in this day and age, or mostly. But if you picked any one of Giannis, Joe, or Joker, then I have no problem with your pick. There is literally no wrong answer for this. Each one of these 3 has an ironclad case for Most Valuable Player award. There's no need to tear one down to prop the other up, which is what a lot of the Embiid and Jokic crowd is doing, and both sides are fucking annoying, to be honest. But we are here to choose MVP, and after looking it over, thinking it over, season ends, thinking it over again, each guy won at one point, legitimately, and I'm not just saying this to couch anything that I'm about to say. Jokic, Giannis, and Embiid were all fantastic this year. I flip-flopped. I even had Giannis 1 at one point late in the season. But here is my top 3. I have Joel Embiid number 1. And if you had Jokic or Giannis ahead of Embiid, that's cool. I think Joel Embiid is the MVP. If you're trying to say that, oh, you're a Sixer fan, you're biased, well, yeah, I'm a fan. There is a little bit of bias in there, but I'm not stupid. I watch basketball. I love basketball. It's my favorite sport, obviously. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this channel. And I love all types of players. And Jokic has been one of my favorite players since he first came on the scene in the league, when he was battling with Jusuf Nurkic for center minutes. And when Denver traded him away, I was like, thank God Jokic can finally shine. I love Giannis too. Giannis is one of the most unique players in NBA history and is already a top 35, 40 if you're being conservative, player of all time. But I have Joel Embiid 1, Nikola Jokic 2, and Giannis 3. And I'm going to list all the feathers Embiid has in his cap for his MVP case, and try not to mention the other candidates as much as possible so people don't get the wrong impression that I'm tearing the others down. But if I do mention the others, just understand why I chose Embiid over the other 2, who are absolutely worthy winners. And Jokic is probably going to win MVP. It seems like the momentum has been swinging that way for the last 3 weeks or so, especially after that ESPN straw poll that came out last month. But Embiid's MVP case lies in the fact that he turned in a very dominant two-way season without his second best player, Ben Simmons. And let's go to the offensive side first. He's the first center since Shaq to lead the NBA in scoring, the first center since Moses Malone to finish the season averaging over 30 points per game. He led the league in 30 and 10 games. He led the league in 40 and 10 games. He averaged 30 and 11, was the main offensive hub for a Sixers team whose second best player was a second-year guard in Tyrese Maxey, offensively, by the way, because we're going to get to the other end later and how I think Embiid has just been criminally underrated this season on the defensive end of the floor. But Embiid being double-teamed, triple-teamed on the block, which is normally a hard place to score from, the post. He was dominant. He became a better playmaker this year because of the absence of Ben Simmons, who we will also talk about later, forced Embiid to involve his offensive game even more by becoming a better passer, limiting his turnovers, the lowest turnover percentage of his career. He started taking the ball off the glass and pushing the ball in transition more. He literally had to do everything for this Philadelphia 76ers team on offense. On defense, it was even more impressive. The fact that the 76ers finished top 10 in defensive rating this year per cleaning the glass, which, by the way, I like cleaning the glass a lot for a lot of the defensive and offensive rating and on-off numbers because it takes out garbage time possessions and end-of-quarter heaves and all that stuff. The fact that the Sixers finished top 10 in defensive rating is truly absurd. Absolutely absurd, because for a lot of the season, Joel Embiid had Tyrese Maxey and Seth Curry starting in the backcourt, which was undersized. Teams would get by them regularly, and Embiid was left there at the rim to protect it, which he did to a great degree once again. Matisse Thybulle, his best wing defender, was only able to average 25 minutes a game because he is a complete zero on the offensive end, aside from a few cuts, which Matisse Thybulle has gotten better at. And then Danny Green, who for a lot of the season was old and injured. So that's a terrible combination. So Embiid really only had 1 1/4 of great perimeter defense. Tobias Harris, for most of the season, was not a good defender until about the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season. George Niang, really? And the on-off numbers don't look as stark as they did in years past because Embiid actually had a viable backup center in Andre Drummond. But guess what? When Andre Drummond left, the on-off difference was stark once again. Just illustrating the need that the fact that Embiid's on-off numbers with the Sixers weren't as great this year as in years past is just an absurd notion, because really it just meant that Embiid had a better backup. His defensive impact is still there. And there were a few halves this year, admittedly, where Embiid took his foot off the gas pedal and had to carry the load on both ends, so he was probably pacing himself. But even Embiid not going full throttle is still a really impactful defensive player. And the fact that, and this is where I'm going to dip into the Jokic side of things for the first time, the fact that Nuggets fans actually tried to bring down Embiid's defensive impact this season and try to say that he took a step back this year was always an absurd notion to me. Nuggets fans should just rip off the Band-Aid now and just flat out say they think Nikola Jokic is a better defender than Joel Embiid and Giannis, because that's what they've been trying to say all year, but really don't want to say it because they don't want to face backlash. Just go all in with it. I'm a fan of going all in with what you believe in. If you truly believe that Nikola Jokic is a better defender than Joel Embiid, because Nikola Jokic has legitimately improved as a defender. He's a good defender now. I still think he has limitations, and those limitations have been exacerbated to the craziest exponential degree in the Warriors series. If you truly believe Jokic is a better defender than Embiid and Giannis, you can go ahead and believe that. Just say it with your chest, but I will still call you crazy and absurd. I love Jokic, but the fact that a lot of people were trying to bring down Embiid's defense this year and say it wasn't as good and that Jokic has somehow caught up to Embiid and Giannis was always just nasty and wrong to me. But when Embiid was off the court, the Sixers were nowhere near sniffing the top 10 in defensive rating. And the fact that he was able to prop up a top 10 defense this season with the personnel that he had, the Ben Simmons-sized hole that left the Sixers, and they lost a lot of defensive versatility and size because of it. The fact that Embiid was able to prop up a top 10 defense was nothing short of impressive. I think it's the most impressive defensive season Embiid has had in his career, and that includes the 2017-18 season where he placed second for Defensive Player of the Year. He was able to do this all year, and this is still after the James Harden trade, where James Harden and Tyrese Maxey still isn't necessarily the greatest defensive backcourt in the NBA. Embiid was able to prop up everything this year. And let me just say, Embiid had a slow first 9 games to the season, because I know a lot of people will bring that up. He had a slow start to the season after he knocked knees on opening night, but guess what? The Sixers were 8-2 in those first 10 games of the season. They were the top of the Eastern Conference. They had the number 1 offensive rating in the NBA through those first 10 games because of Embiid, who showed immediately early on in the season that he was a better passer. Teams were still double teaming and triple teaming him. And yeah, he had a slow start, but he was also injured. But also at the same time, he was the reason the Sixers were at the top of the Eastern Conference. Then he got the coronavirus and missed 3 weeks. The Sixers went 2-7 in that stretch and looked like a hard competing rebuilding team, which people seem to have conveniently forgot about in Joel Embiid's MVP case. Then Embiid came back, and boy, when he came back from COVID, he absolutely wreaked havoc on the entire NBA. There was a stretch from December 15th to the All-Star break where Embiid had a case, and I put him here as the best player in the world. He was playing like the best player in the world from December 15th to the All-Star break. He averaged 33 points per game, 11 rebounds per game, nearly 5 assists per game on 52% shooting over the stretch of 29 games from December 15th to the All-Star break, February 17th. Legitimately the best player in the world playing like it during that stretch. And he was still dominant defensively. And then, of course, he had to readjust when Harden came back. But guess what? Post-All-Star break, Embiid was still great. And even in the period where he apparently lost steam in the MVP race and people started talking about Giannis and Jokic as the season closed. Post-All-Star break, Embiid still averaged 32.5, nearly 13 rebounds per game, nearly 4 assists per game, nearly 1.5 steals per game, 1.5 blocks per game, on nearly 51% shooting from the field, and 37% from 3, by the way. So all season, Embiid has had a legitimate MVP case, and the Ben Simmons situation absolutely matters. And I know people are going to be like, oh, narrative shouldn't matter. I'm talking about on court. Ben Simmons not playing affected the Sixers in an adverse way on the court. And yes, in the locker room too, because that leads to the on-court stuff. But on the court, the Sixers didn't have their best initiator and passer at the time until they got Harden. And they didn't have their best perimeter defender, one of the most versatile defenders in the NBA, and the reason that the Sixers had a lot of versatility and intimidating size on the defensive end of the floor. That was the identity during the Simmons and Embiid era, defense. And one of those key cogs were gone. And Embiid had to carry that top 10 defense all year without having the prerequisite size, the prerequisite amount of perimeter defenders that you need to have a viable defense. Embiid carried that all year. And that is why he is the MVP to me. Jokic absolutely has a case because he carried a bad Nuggets team that was playing their backups in the wake of the Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. injury. I cannot believe Jokic got that team to 48 wins. But to me, I'm taking the two-way dominance of Embiid versus Jokic. There is no right or wrong answer to me in the Nikola Jokic-Embiid debate. After the bubble, I briefly had Jokic ahead of Embiid because I thought Embiid did not have a great year in 2019-20, although part of that was because the roster construction fucking sucked. But I had Jokic briefly ahead of Embiid after having Embiid as the best center in the NBA for a few years, even with his injury history. And then Embiid took the next step in the 2020-21 season and became the MVP candidate we all knew he could be. and then took his game to another level this year, even with the slow first 9 games of the season where he was still a legitimate MVP candidate. And then I have Giannis third. Giannis was great all year, even though I thought he was slow by his standards for about the first month of the season, and the Bucks also had some weird losses along the way. I was expecting them to rip off a 60-win season, and I'm not going to hold that expectation against Giannis, but the Bucks weren't playing up to snuff for a lot of the year, and then they turned it on late. If you want to pick Giannis also, that is fine, but to me, because of the adversity that Jokic and Embiid had to deal with, that gives him the edge over Giannis for me. And the fact that Embiid did it on both ends of the floor, and I know Jokic was good this year, except for about the last 6 weeks of the season. The entire Nuggets team just decided not to play defense, and also because the Nuggets were tired. They had a really jam-packed schedule towards the end. But for me, personally, I'm taking Embiid as the MVP. To me, he should win MVP. But if you had someone different, I completely understand. So damn, part 2 went a lot longer anyway, but thanks for listening. I'll make sure to put timestamps in this, but that is my first edition of the Sly Hooper NBA Awards. I will be listing out my all NBA teams, and I'm debating whether to do my own format since I don't have a vote, or do the format that the NBA is doing, which is guard, forward, center. And let me just say one more thing about the Embiid, Jokic, Giannis. They should all be first team All-NBA. But the fact that Embiid's probably going to be second team again is fucking ridiculous. I understand that there's tradition, which is the thing that I'm struggling with. Do we want the 5 best players on there, or do we keep the format of a team? To me, a happy compromise would be backcourt, frontcourt, much like the NBA did with the All-Star game format. But there is no way Embiid or Jokic should be on the second team, but it's most likely going to be Embiid because for some reason, the voters just don't want to use the tools that the NBA gives them to make sure that the best players get on the first team. Yes, Jokic and Embiid are centers, true centers, through and through. I get that. But the NBA is giving you the chance to put Jokic at forward and Embiid at center so you can have the top 3 MVP candidates on the first team All-NBA. And yet, voters are just like, no, we're all right. Which is stupid. But I digress. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. And make sure to be on the lookout for my All-NBA team selections.